Hello and welcome to Dominion Plunder Previews Day 2. Let's get right into it. Donald X says the other big part of Plunder is duration, so let's see some of those. So we've got, starting with Siren, 3-cost action duration attack. Each other player gains a curse. At the start of your next turn, draw until you have 8 cards in hand. When you gain this, trash it unless you trash an action from your hand. So Siren is just some new duration card. It's a little hard to get. Someone has to get lured to their doom. There are some subtle combos for getting around that penalty. See if you can find them, says Donald X. Okay. So when you gain this, trash it unless you gain an action from your hand. I mean, if you exchange for it somehow, like that would get around it. I don't know how you would exchange for it. If you have a like a command card, like Band of Misfits, that's allowed to play durations. Actually, is Band of Misfits even allowed to play durations? I forget. But let's see. Captain certainly isn't. Yeah, you can. Okay, you can play with Band of Misfits. You can play with Overlord. What else? Maybe that's. There's not that many command cards. I guess you could inherit it. That would be kind of fun. Although I don't know how many of these you want in your deck. You could definitely end up wanting 2. That seems clear enough. So having a third one probably wouldn't be so bad. Then again, maybe you want to have this before you get inheritance, but then again, maybe not because it's hard to get anyway. So regardless of that, that's getting into the weeds. So what do we think about this card? So first of all, the draw until you have 8 cards in hand is quite strong. It's important to note that you can choose the order of effects at the start of your turn. So if you have other duration draw, you can choose to do this first, and then use that to draw past 8 cards, including if you compare this to Haunted Woods, for example, which just says +3 cards. You can, if you've been militiaed or whatever, you can draw more than you would with Haunted Woods. It has synergy with Tide Pools. Amazing. My favorite card. Yeah, if you have to discard with Tide Pools, you can discard first and then you can draw up. There's not, I guess, in terms of other effects that make you discard at the start of your turn, there's Gang of Pickpockets, and there's, you could say Cathedral. It doesn't make you discard, but it makes you trash. You're probably more likely to want to draw first so that you can see more cards, but if you have a card in hand that you know is what you want to trash, then you can trash it first and then you can draw. So yeah, the draw here is really quite strong. I would expect to want a couple of these in my deck in most kingdoms, as a single terminal. It's quite reasonable. If you're playing something where nothing else is drawing and it's the only terminal, if any, on the one hand, you're not going to be able to find your 2 copies consistently, but on the other hand, you might just get some more copies because it's a really good single terminal, and you don't have to worry about drawing it dead. You could collide them, but you don't have to worry about the drawing into them dead when you play them. So that's nice too. The issue there, of course, is that in a deck where you don't have high action density, acquiring these in the first place is going to be a challenge. The ideal scenario is, of course, you are playing with shelters and you have Necropolis. You trash Necropolis to get your Siren, and that's great. Outside of that, like, you're gonna have to have something that you're willing to just toss, to the Siren. The fact that it costs 3, I think, is like, it seems like this is definitely a card that's like worth more than 3, right? If you were to not have the bottom text, it would cost, I don't know what it would cost. Honestly, I think it seems like it could be kind of busted at 5. Like, it's really strong. Obviously, giving out a curse. Like, if you compare it to cards like Haunted Woods or Swamp Hag or other like 5-cost duration attacks, I think it compares favorably. Sea Hag, or not Sea Hag, Sea Witch. I mean, it's Sea Witch. Maybe you could argue that has better tempo than this does, so maybe that one would actually be better at 5. I'm not totally sure. But there's so many cases where that draw to 8 is just going to be so good that I could also believe that this card is better, and even significantly better. But it doesn't cost 5, right? It costs 3 in an action card, which is definitely, I would say that is more expensive in most cases. Like, yeah, with Necropolis, it's certainly cheaper, but and like, even if you think of it in terms of like, I'm opening, I don't know, Harbinger or whatever, and then buying this, on a 3-coin hand, it's like, that's easier to do potentially than hitting 5. But on the other hand, it does mean that you're like spending one of your gains to do something that isn't actually going to improve your deck. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could be. Like, there could be a significant opportunity cost to that. You could compare that to with what I said, you could compare what I said to Stockpile and be like, well, Stockpile in the long run doesn't stay in your deck, but it's so good. Like, who cares? Like, and that's fair enough. I mean, it's a little bit different getting a Harbinger and immediately trashing it to getting to play Stockpile, a whole bunch of times. Obviously, but I guess, I just think there could be some like significant opportunity cost if like you need to, like, to get a couple of these, you need to grab some actions that you're not only not like using, but not even playing once, and that, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't think it's going to be difficult to do it. I just think there is going to be an opportunity cost there, and there's definitely a case to be made that most of the time this is going to effectively be more expensive, but it's going to be worth it because it's really strong. So that's probably fine. And how many boards don't have some card that you're willing to trash, right, to gain this? Like, so the flip side of this is that, like, there's almost always going to be like a relatively convenient way to get this. Like, the number of times that you're going to play a board where there's not going to be any action cards costing 3 or 4 is going to be vanishingly small. There are boards that you run into where there's no actions costing 3 or less. I should have said previously, I said 3 or 4. What I should have said is less than 5. Like, there's almost always, like, very, 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 very close to always going to be something that you can get at 2 or 3 or 4 or even 1 in the case of Poorhouse, that you can turn into a Siren. There are cases where you have nothing that costs less than 4 that's an action, and that could get annoying, because that's where you could get into like, oh, I really want to open, I don't know, Priest, and I want to play the Priest. I don't want to trash it. That is pretty rare, but it could happen. Because like sometimes when there's nothing costing less than 4, you're going to not super care about trashing the 4 cost anyway. But yeah, that's I think like the vast majority of the time it's not going to be like a huge problem, but it is going to be a trade-off. The thing about subtle combos for getting around that penalty, I mean, I don't know if Donald X means things like command, because that doesn't really, that's a way to to play the card without having to trash an action, but it's not a way to get the card without having to trash an action. And I don't know if that distinction matters or not, right? If he's thinking about it in those terms. In general, exchange is a way to get around that, but I don't know how you would exchange it into a Siren. Exile would be one, like if you can invest in it, or if you can, gain it with, or like exile it with like Camel Train or something. You still have to trash, like you'd still have to get one of them in those cases. Like if you in the exile cases, like regardless of what is doing the exiling, you would have to trash something to get like a copy and then discard however many other copies you wanted. I guess no, I was gonna say tools, but no, tools still gains. It's just gains something that your opponent has in play. Yeah, I don't think nothing else is coming to mind in terms of ways to acquire cards that doesn't qualify as gaining. But maybe there is something. If so, let me know what I overlooked. All right, so good card, clearly. Next up, we have Stowaway. 3 cost action, duration, reaction. At the start of your next turn, +2 cards. When anyone gains a duration card, you may play this from your hand. And Stowaway is a duration card that cares about duration cards. Yes, today is just mirroring yesterday. Because of treasure that cares about treasures. Okay. They'll stow away on anything. A merchant ship, a barge, even a swamp hag. Okay. I'm not sure. Like, oh, I guess if you conceptualize durations as journeys on a ship, which I imagine is the reason that they were like put in the seaside in the first place, right? You get, the ship goes out, the ship comes back. That's why it takes time. Then yeah, it makes sense to say they stow away on anything, because I was going to say, well, they don't stow away on non-durations, but yeah, I guess that's not a thing that could be stowed away on. Anyway, this is like we're getting a fair number of reactions now in Dominion where you get like a basic draw card, just a moat draw card that has the ability to be activated, and thereby be non-terminal. So you have Black Cat, right? Your opponent buys a green card or gains a green card. You get to react your Black Cat and draw your 2 cards immediately. You have Sheepdog, where if you gain a card, you get to react. And now you have Stowaway, when anyone gains a duration card. Notably, if you gain a duration card, that counts. So it's harder than Sheepdog for you to self-activate, but you can do it. And then, of course, your opponents can do it as well. The fact that it's at the start of your next turn means I think you're generally gonna prefer to have your opponents reacting this, just because you having that draw at the start of your turn, like if you have this in your starting hand, you want it in your starting hand. If your opponent gains duration, if they don't, maybe not so much, but because that's going to be faster. You're going to get the card back faster. You're going to get the draw at the most opportune time, compared to if you're activating this yourself. Actually, I guess it works pretty well if you're activating it in your buy phase, because you have it, you've drawn it, you have it in your hand, and then you buy a duration and you play it, and it's going to draw cards next turn, which is more relevant than this turn, unless there's Villa or whatever that's going to make you able to actually do something with the cards that you draw. So I guess that does actually work pretty well. But then you don't have the Stowaway the next turn, so it is going to be kind of a slow card in that sense. some of these cards, some of the like so like Caravan Guard, I guess. Well, I mean, I guess you like Caravan Guard. You can in theory play this every turn if your opponent helps you, essentially. Because it'll be in play on your turn, and then you'll discard it, and then if you happen to draw it and they happen to gain a duration, then you can play it again, going into your next turn. So, but that's going to be hard to do with anything like consistency. So in general, this is going to be a card that you can only play every other turn. So it's not going to be a ton of draw. I don't think this is particularly strong. I mean, sometimes it's going to be the draw that you have, and it's going to be like a terminal Den of Sin or whatever, and you just have to kind of, or Way of the Squirrel, I guess would be the more direct comparison, and you just have to kind of deal with that, like, because that's the option that you have. And sometimes Way of the Squirrel is really good draw, like if you have a ton of terminal space, because there's a ton of villages on the board. Granted, part of the reason that works so well is because anything can be squirreled, and so you have a ton of flexibility, whereas with this you wouldn't. You would specifically have to get this card, and it's not like you'd be playing other things as squirrel. But nonetheless, like there's some comparison to be made there. But yeah, I don't think this is terribly strong, just because 3 coins for draw 2 in general is not strong. Terminal draw 2 in general is not strong, and this is generally worse than terminal draw 2. Like, yeah, it can be non-terminal, but it's like the way in which it's slow is like problematic, for the most part. Like, yeah, sometimes it works out to your advantage, but a lot of the times it's just like it's going to be slower draw than if it just said +2 cards. So I definitely don't think this is going to be super strong. I mean, on heavy plunder boards where there's tons of durations, maybe this is really good. I don't know, but I don't have super high expectations. All right, so going to the next set of cards, we have Swamp Shacks. +2 actions, +1 card per 3 cards you have in play, round down. Huh. Swamp Shacks is a non-duration card that cares about duration cards. It doesn't call them out, but you can see how they help it. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Obviously, that's not the only thing they care about. Like, if you can just play them later in your turn, then they get better. So if you have 3 cards in play, this is a village. If you have 6 cards in play, like 3 or fewer, or no, sorry, at least, I guess 3 to 5 cards in play. Let's put it that way. If you have 3 to 5 cards in play, this is a village. If you have 6 to 8 cards in play, this is a lost city. If you have more than that, then it's a card that we don't. Well, I guess it's city quarter-esque would be the best comparison. This can actually be stronger draw than city quarter, in the sense that the cards that you put into play are just, well, first of all, they don't have to be action cards. I mean, they mostly have to be action cards, but technically they don't, right? There's ways you can get treasures into play and whatever. The fact that it takes advantage of durations that you never saw this turn is like another factor. And it, with city quarter, right, you want to, if you're, for example, if you're doing gain and play with city quarter, you draw cards and then you play your gainer and you play your city quarter. That generally works very well because you probably do have more stuff in your hand that you can use with the city quarter draw. But there are cases where, by virtue of playing the cards out of your hand, now you don't have as much draw that you can leverage with the city quarter. Usually city quarter provides enough overdraw that this isn't really actually in practice an issue, but you can understand, the mechanics of it and how it could be. this like goes the opposite direction, where like as you put those cards into play, it just gets stronger. So like from a gain and play perspective, this is potentially completely bonkers. The problem is going to be the upfront draw and the fact that it doesn't, like if you start your turn and you don't have a bunch of stuff already in play and you're just like, I need to kick off, like, well, I guess I'm playing my Necropolis that cost me 4 coins. Yay. So like this card is going to swing wildly in value. I mean it's also worth noting one card per 3 cards you have in play is a lot less efficient than City Quarter, of course, which is fair. I mean it's a 4 cost rather than 8 debt cost. But still it is significantly less efficient, so I don't like actually expect it to in practice be out competing City Quarter pretty much basically ever as a draw card. But I just think it's worth noting like the way that the different sort of like draw curve that it has. I mean, City Quarter does have the same phenomenon of like sometimes it's hard to kick off with the City Quarter because you don't have the actions in your hand yet. So in that sense, there is a similarity, but this will like very reliably be drawing cards later in your turn if you like have a deck at all, whereas like City Quarter, does have potential limits depending on the composition of your deck and what you're trying to do. So yeah, I think it's certainly, like things like durations are going to help, especially, permanent durations like Champion and Hireling are going to make this card better. Hireling in particular, because it'll increase your starting hand size, which makes you more likely to kick off in the first place. It's as a village, right? It's important to note that it is a village, and as a village, the fact that you're going to want to play this first, like it is going to be, there's going to be a lot of times where, like I said, you're going to be playing this as Necropolis, and you're not really going to have much of a choice about it. But, if you have cantrips in your deck, you're going to want to play the cantrips first, and you're going to want to like try to backload this as much as possible so that you can get as much value out of the draw part as you can. It's going to encourage situations like if you have villagers where you just go ahead and spend villagers because you're like, I just want to get cards into play. I guess I'll burn down, my villager supply so that I can draw cards with the swamp shacks. So like, how strong is this overall? As I said, +1 card per 3 cards you have in play is not terribly efficient. So it is going to be like slow to ramp. It's only outcompeting Lost City when you have 9 cards in play, which is a lot. So I think in practice, you should expect this to be probably like, honestly, most often it's probably going to be Necropolis, just because like if you look at like the first one that you gain, most of the time, when you're playing it, you're not going to have like a ton of stuff in play necessarily. So just like in terms of like the number of plays across the average game, probably the most often it's actually Necropolis. But like as you progress through the game, you will probably get to a point where it's more often acting as at least Village than Necropolis. But I think thinking of it as Village level draw probably then actually comes out to be the likely average-ish case if there's not like a bunch of synergies or something like that. It's going to be hard even to get to the Lost City level. It's going to be even harder to get past it. And note that like stuff like horses will not synergize with this. So like the stuff has to actually be in play. I guess the fact that even if it's only like if you're only in quotes reliably getting up to like draw 3, for gain and play purposes, that is really good. So like on the one hand, this is not going to be very reliable as a draw card in general, I don't think. But on the other hand, when you get your deck moving, like there are going to be cases where suddenly it's enabling you to do just all kinds of stuff. Because like, when you're doing when you're doing, overdraw, gain and play type stuff, a lot of times like you run into limits where, like, for example, it just like, you have Market Square and you trash the a card, you discard the Market Square, you discard the Market Square, you get a gold. Now you have 2 cards in your discard. You draw one of them with a cantrip, and the gold was on top. Okay, you didn't see the Market Square again. Just as a simple example, this is like, you're like never gonna have that problem, right? You're just like always gonna get all the cards. So the pile out potential with this is real if there's like any kind of good gaining going on, because you're gonna just be able to like draw and draw and draw and draw. Like you can just gain, if you can, especially if you can gain a Swamp Shacks and a whatever, right? Like imagine like Groom for Swamp Shacks, for example. Like that's like just nuts. So and on top of like grooming for other things or whatever. So in terms of power level, I think it's probably actually going to be on the weaker side of Villages. It's just that it has a lot of upside. I mean, we're really going to have to play it before we see like what the distribution is and how often it's difficult to kick off. It's going to be the kind of card where you're going to want another village if you have that option. Like if regular village is on the board, like you're going to want, if anything, probably more regular villages than Swamp Shacks. Like even if you're doing like a really big build and have all kinds of stuff going on in your deck, just because like early in the turn you would rather be playing village than playing Swamp Shacks, but then late in the turn you want to be playing the Swamp Shacks. So I think this is going to be on the weaker side of villages overall, but it's going to be a very like have very, very wide distributions. It's going to be very board dependent. And then we have Buried Treasure. The start of your next turn, +1 buy and +3 coins. When you gain this, play it. 5 cost treasure duration. It's the Donald Duck says it's the payload version of Den of Sin. Yeah, okay, I get why he says that. It is slow, right, as a duration. You're not going to get to see this every turn. You're not like, it is probably going to be better actually in non-deck drawing cases. Like if you're playing, if you're playing a money deck, like this is pretty nice because you hit 5, you buy this, it goes into play, which is way faster than what money normally gets to do. And then, the next turn you get it. It's kind of spiky, which is, which could be good or bad depending on the situation. But then like when you're not worried about it missing shuffles so much, right? Because it only is going to miss the shuffle if it's in like the bottom hand, like before you trigger the shuffle. So like that's, whereas if you're building a draw your deck every turn deck, then you need 2 of these to get, the consistent value out of it. And that's like 10 coins to gain a buy and 3 coins every turn is a lot. Like that's not really efficient at all. It is good for tempo. And so you might still end up picking it up for that reason. But like if you're already drawing your deck, is that tempo actually relevant? Because so earlier in the game before you're drawing your deck, it's good for tempo. But like once you're drawing your deck, like if you have the choice between this and like Sacred Grove, right, which is not a particularly exciting payload card to be adding, but Sacred Grove you can play every turn, and if you're already drawing your deck, you can draw your Sacred Grove. The fact that this goes into play, it is nice, right? It's a +1, effectively +1 draw and +1 action relative to Sacred Grove. But if you can draw your deck, the fact that you can play that card every turn is going to be helpful. And this, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to gain another one. I tend to think that this is going to be something that you get. If anything, you might just take it early. So like there's times when you want plus buy in your deck. You want plus buy in your deck, and you hit 5 early and you get spices. And the reason you get spices is because A, you want plus buy in your deck, and B, you get 2 coffers. So when I say early, I guess I mean like turn 3 specifically. You hit 5 on turn 3, and you buy spices because you want the plus buy in your deck, and then you also want the coffer so that you can hit 5 again on turn 4 and get the card, like the action card that you want that costs 5. And I could see doing that with this card, where you, like, similar to spices, you're like, okay, I want the plus buy in my deck, so I'm gonna buy this. I'm gonna get +3 next turn, so I'm definitely gonna hit 5 again, and then I can get my whatever, my witch or my recruiter or something like that. Only thing compared to spices is, again, number one, the coffers are generally going to be better because you might not have to spend them, and then you have them. And then also the fact that you're still going to need another one of these in a way that you don't necessarily with the spices, like in the long run. I mean, granted, if you're buying spices turn 3, like, you may well end up buying spices again like turn 5 or something like that, because you're not drawing your deck anyway, and you want, like, the coffers are nice, and having another source of plus buy is good, blah blah blah. Like, it depends, but like in the scenario where you really just want the one for a while, like, you could end up needing to get a second buried treasure, again, depending on like the composition of your deck. So yeah, I think this will have a role to play early in games, and it may be that role is relevant enough that, like, it ends up being gained reasonably often. But I think that's going, if this card is not going to end up being a below average card, it is going to be on the basis of that. But I suspect it will be anyway, below average card, I mean. Okay, let us move on to the next section. Plunder has a new kind of landscape traits. These modify a pile. They only modify a kingdom card pile, not e.g. gold, and only action and treasure piles. So no night cards, no victory cards. Technically, they don't modify the pile. They just refer to it somehow, but the pile will feel modified, take it from me. At the start of a game with a trait, you randomly pick which eligible pile is modified, and the trait card can slide under the pile, leaving the text showing and the name on the sides, hence the layout. Ah, okay. Well, let's take a look at that then. Yeah, so the layout is like, I guess the idea is that you remember what the trait does and you see the word. Okay, so this is not how I was expecting this to work. I was expecting this to be something that you chose to do in the way that you do with your adventures tokens. But I suppose, given that adventures tokens exist, maybe it makes more sense for that to work this way anyway. So they are adjectives, as I was hoping they would be. I mean, it makes sense, of course. But anyway, so we start with Pious. When you gain a Pious card, you may trash from your hand. Sure sounds like plan. So Pious, maybe that shows up on a smithy. So this game, when you gain a smithy, you also get to trash a card from your hand. Well, that's bound to be handy. Yeah, so that's, yeah, that it's like you just have the plan token on some pile, and like, okay, that's the pile that you have it on. You don't have to buy plan, but you might also see it on a pile that you don't really care about. I mean, this is not going to be the sort of thing where we can like evaluate strength, because it's not like a choice. I guess what you could evaluate is like, how much better does it make that pile? Like, how much more likely are you to acquire cards from that pile based on having that trait? Well, for sure, like Pious, you're gonna be more inclined to get a card from a pile if it also trashes a card when you get it. I mean, kind of like Sook. Obviously, Sook trashes too. Plan is not really the right comparison in that respect, because Plan, you're choosing where to put it, and so you're not going to put it on a card that you wouldn't otherwise get, right? And of course, sometimes this is going to land on a card that you definitely want anyway. So then, well, it's all upside. But sometimes this is going to land on a card that you either definitely wouldn't otherwise get, or like would, yeah, maybe. And that'll be where it's at its most interesting. You can imagine having a situation where, like, okay, I have 4 coins and I have 2 villages on the board. Like, there's Workers Village and then there's regular village, but village is Pious, and I get to trash a card. Like, how much do I want the plus buy, or do I just want to trash a card? Probably just want to trash a card, honestly. Maybe that's not even a good example, because you probably just want to trash the card. But stuff like that. Maybe you have like I don't know, like a good, like, would you take like Journeyman over Margrave because Journeyman was Pious, like that sort of thing, right? That'll get like really interesting. So that could be really cool from like a creating interesting situations and changing up the game standpoint. Then we have Fawning. Fawning means province. Oh wait, I should read the. Fawning is when you gain a province, gain a Fawning card. Okay. Like gain a card from that pile. Fawning means province comes with a Fawning card. It's not optional, which is sometimes fun. Okay. This is Duchess returns in all of her glory. Yeah, I mean, except that it's not optional. That is, how often is that even going to be bad? Like, you didn't want Duchess very often, but Duchess was a particularly weak card. But this could land on anything. This could be like, every time you gain a province, gain like a Silk Merchant. Well, okay, you probably won't have a province before the Silk Merchants are gone anyway, so bad example. Every time you gain a province, gain a Recruiter, gain a Hunting Party. I don't know, like, you could gain a King's Court. Like, imagine there's a tournament board and you have Fawning King's Court. It's like, oh my god. Or it could be like, Fortune Teller or something, and then it's kind of like Duchess, where you're like, oh, I didn't really want that. It's Money Lender. Well, I already trashed my coppers. I don't really need another Money Lender, thank you. That, it's really hard to say, like, in the general case, how that's going to affect the board. I have to think that more often than not, it is going to encourage earlier greening, because most cards are things that you would like to add to your deck given the opportunity to do so, sort of for free. I mean, it's not free, right? It's the opportunity cost of, like, instead of buying a province, I could do something else. But it's sort of for free, and usually free cards are good. So yeah, I mean, I think this will encourage earlier greening, but really it's going to just be super board dependent. It could be very interesting, right? Like, to have that choice of, like, oh, like, do I want to take an early province here because it comes with this other thing? Like, maybe I could buy the other thing by itself, and I could, don't need the province, but, like, hey, like, if I can get the thing anyway, and I get the province, like, maybe, I can, outrace my opponent that way. I don't know. These are definitely going to be interesting. That's my initial feeling. Shy lets you discard, or sorry, I need to read the thing first, then read what Donald X said. So, Shy, at the start of your turn, you may discard one Shy card for +2 cards. Okay, Shy lets you discard one copy of the Shy card at the start of your turn for +2 cards. It's pretty simple, but still spices up almost everything. So this is crop rotation, except instead of rotating crops, you're rotating actions and treasures, or treasures, I should say. If I had to, I guess if I had to evaluate the strength of these in terms of like impact, or like how much are they changing the game, how differently are you playing because of them, I would say Pious is the most impactful, and then Shy, and then Fawning. Like Pious is really a big deal. Like if you can get it potentially in the opening, trash an estate. Like there's lots of exciting things you can do. Shy, I'm just thinking that like it turns that pile into, like, at the start of your turn, like, play like a lab kind of. I mean, it's not. It does not. In some ways, it's better. In some ways, it's worse, depending on what the card is. You have to discard the card, but you can redraw it. So, if you want to be playing it at the end of your turn anyway, that might be like just really, really good and all upside. Or if it's a village, you might be like, oh, I don't know. But I mean, having the opportunity to just like do something akin to crop rotation, is nice. I mean, it's not going to be as like one of the reasons that crop rotation is good is because green cards are bad to have in your hand, and so like turning that downside into an upside is a bigger value swing, whereas Shy is not going to do that, because almost inevitably your card that you would be discarding with Shy is going to be a better card than the green card you would be discarding with crop rotation. Like there are exceptions to that, but not very many. But still, like it's a nice effect. And I guess the thing is, you're not probably very likely to take this, like to buy the card from that pile just because of Shy, the way that you might. I think I think that's more likely with Pious than with Shy. But then again, I mean, it still makes the pile more desirable in many cases. Sometimes it won't, right? If you have the opportunity to discard like your city quarter for +2 cards, you're probably like, okay, I mean, this doesn't really affect how much I want city quarter. Like, yeah, in theory, like if the city quarter, have the kind of like city quarter dud, then I can discard it, and that is good. And maybe, you know what? Actually, I take it back. Maybe that does make city quarter. Like maybe you take city quarter a little earlier than you would otherwise. So maybe that isn't even a good example. And like if you have like something like a lab, discarding the lab instead of playing it is pretty much strictly better, because you now have the lab in a position where you can use it for gain and play. So essentially you can have more draw in your deck than you would otherwise. I mean, if you're doing gain and play on exactly one card, it doesn't really matter, because you'd have to play some other card to draw the lab, and then play the lab to draw the other card, instead of just playing the card that drew the lab to directly draw the other card. But if you have to draw 2 cards, right, then you play the card that, well, I guess you have a chance. I guess if you have like you get to the bottom of your deck, you have a cantrip left, gain something, you play the cantrip, there's a chance that you get to see both of the cards that you gained. something like that. I mean, and the other thing is that you can end up top decking it, right? Because it's in your discard pile. If you trigger a shuffle, you can top deck it. So it seems like it's pretty much all upside to discard it. So like you need for this to be something that you just never want to use. It has to be, maybe like I said, it's like a cursed village or something that's like gonna draw that many cards anyway and is gonna give you actions that you're gonna kick off with. Even in that case, like you could still have, like, if you had multiple in your hand, you didn't need, well, no, that doesn't make sense. If you have multiple in your hand, you probably want to play one so that you have terminal space to lower your hand size so that you can play the next one. And like discarding a card for 2 cards before you play a different cursed village doesn't really make sense. So maybe that's an example, but there's not going to be very many cards where there's just no upside to doing this. Like, I guess Hunting Party would be an example where, like, yes, the lab thing still theoretically applies, but this value of the sifting is generally going to outpace the relevance of that. And so, but many piles, getting extra draw is just going to be nice. So, and maybe it'll land on Village Green. But yeah, I think overall this is not the mechanic I was expecting it to be, but I think it's actually, that's a good thing. Like, I think this is, this isn't just like Adventures Tokens round 2. I mean, I say just, I mean, that wouldn't be a bad thing, but I think the fact that this is something different from Adventures Tokens round 2 is good. I think it'll do different things, and it's like you don't have to worry from a balancing perspective. You don't have to worry about like, oh, how much does this cost? Like, is it worth a buy or whatever? Like, or whatever other mechanism you need. It's just there, so it doesn't need to be balanced in that way. Which means the abilities that it gives can be kind of whatever, like, and including something like Fawning, where it's not even like, I don't know. It's like a different sort of thing. Like that would be like, being able to apply that to whatever pile would be like potentially really crazy. Like, you wouldn't want probably to give players the ability to choose to put it on King's Court, for example. But if it just happens to land on King's Court, well, I mean, then that's just what happened. So yeah, so I think these seem really cool. I'm definitely excited for Traits. This is fun. I think this is the most exciting thing that has been previewed so far. The other cards are all exciting. Dominion cards are always exciting, but this is like the most new and different thing, even more so than like whatever cool abilities we've seen on the other cards. So I'm definitely looking forward to playing with these and seeing how they influence games. Yeah, so that will do it for today. Tomorrow, says Donald X, we have loot, so we'll get to find out what that is. I have to imagine it's non-supply piles, somewhat like spoils, in some capacity, but presumably with more variety. Like, I'm kind of anticipating like the ruins of spoils or the spoils of ruins, like, which is to say, you get a variety pack, or maybe you get to choose between different options or something. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of like, conditional triggering mechanism, like in the way that like exile, like discarding from exile is like, oh, you have to gain a copy of the card to discard it from exile, and then there's also some exceptions, right, where there's other ways to do it with certain specific cards. I wouldn't be surprised if like the loot piles have, so like, I guess the one way that they could be instead of being non-supply piles, one way that they could be supply piles is if they had, like, you know, when you do this, gain a whatever, kind of like Fawning, actually. So, like, you know, when you successfully complete this mini game, you gain a copy of this card. I think that's less likely than them being non-supply piles, but that could be another thing. But we're going to get to find out tomorrow. In the meantime, go check out the new stuff on Dominion.games, and until next time.